How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
So one day back in, I think it was March of 2023, I got this email from somebody who had read my book, Culture by Design, and he kindly shared how much the contents of that book had really resonated with him. It happened to be this guy, Ron Lovett, and he was an entrepreneur based in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. He was the host of a podcast called Scaling Culture, as well as the author of a book of the same title. And I appeared on his show later that same year, and we had this great hour-long conversation about building really impactful company rituals and selecting good cultural fits, among a lot of other things. Well, today we come full circle as I welcome Ron here to the Culture Architects Show. Some things to know about Ron. Back in 2002, he had founded the security firm Source Security. And in 2017, 15 years later, he sold that company at a huge multiple. So congrats to Ron. He went on to found VIDA Living, a provider of community-oriented affordable housing across all of Canada. Ron is also, as we've said, an author. He's written 3 books, 2 of which have to do with organizational culture. And they were built on his decades of experience as a true culture architect in his own right. I'm looking forward to comparing notes today and hearing all about Ron's fascinating journey. So welcome to the Culture Architects podcast, Ron. Great to have you with us.
Great to see you again, and I'm also excited to trade notes. That was how long ago?
It was 2003. It was like 3 years ago.
Oh, 3 years ago. So
yes.
The world has changed so much.
I'm
super excited to hear to share what's new in my world and to learn from you today too. So thanks for having me, David.
You bet. So let's just do a little catching up. So It was like 3 years ago that I spoke on your podcast, Scaling Culture. Bring me up to speed. What's happened in those last 3 years? What have you been doing?
Yeah. So my company VIDA, which is a Spanish word for life, is where I've been focusing most of my time.
Okay.
I mean, as you know, I geek out about culture. And the other thing I geek out about is decentralized environments. So no mid-level management at all.
Wow.
And so today, if you look back to my security company and what I believe was the soul of the company that made it successful was great company culture, incredibly decentralized, no mid-level managers for a private security company. That was unheard of.
Yeah.
And in most industries unheard of. As you build your organization, you build to the boardroom and add layers and complexity. And I think sometimes the hardest thing is to make it simpler as you scale. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And so today, VIDA owns just over 3,000 apartments across Canada. We're an affordable housing provider that buys existing affordable housing. And so, those wood frame buildings you see, the stick walk-ups, 1960s, 70s, 80s, early 2000s. And we have a very decentralized model. No property managers, no leasing agents. I don't have an operations team. The customers, we created a role called the building ambassadors. They run the communities or the buildings for us. So we have a really cool platform and ecosystem that activates them, allows them to make decisions, have the right balance of decision-making, autonomy, checks and balances, et cetera, which is always something we're always going back and looking at, having the right balance on. And so I've been foot on the gas with that, and now raising $300 to $500 million to acquire more of these buildings. So doing a big raise right now, and because we've got about probably $450 million of assets that we own today and manage, and really building VIDA as a platform. I want to become the Hilton Hotel of residential affordable housing, and trying to crack the code internationally on like an investment can have, a strong purpose, but have strong risk-adjusted returns at the same time. Those two things can live together. That's the code I'm trying to crack as Elon's trying to go to Mars.
So as you think about it, it's interesting to me how often it is that entrepreneurs, and myself included, sometimes have like I'll call it a point to prove about, like, we have this vision that business can be done in a certain way, and I'm going to create a company. I'm going to show people that it can be done that way. And so I get a sense from you that you have that kind of I don't want to call it a missionary zeal, but a point of view that you have an idea of how companies ought to be run. And so it's a central part of that is this decentralized, sort of saying a contradiction, a central concept in that is a decentralized way of organizing a company. So tell me more about, like, where did that come from in your view, and why do you think that's such an important thing? It's clearly a passion of yours. Talk more about that.
Yeah. And I do see it a bit of a missionary, but you have to be careful, just like high level. I feel like there's a quote that you can wrap around this to try to, try to keep you clean and hope that you'll be successful, which is, I would say, stubborn on vision, but flexible in execution. So I am stubborn as hell on the vision, but flexible on how we execute that vision. I think that's the balance that you need to have, because if you're stubborn on the vision, but not flexible on how you execute, I think you get into trouble. And so to your question, where did it all start? Well, it started and I wrote about this in 2018 when I released my first book, Outrageous Empowerment, but this thesis of when I was building the private security company and we were building mid-level tiers of management. So a security manager that was scheduling the security guards, he or she got too busy, you'd add a scheduler beneath them. And then they got too busy, you add someone else. And all of a sudden, as the CEO, I was 7 layers deep between the front lines and myself. So a few things happened. One, by the time something went wrong in the company and it showed up on my desk, it was too late. It was too late. It also, I would say, drained the entrepreneurial nimbleness and spirit for me. I couldn't pilot things. I was too far removed. I couldn't move swiftly. So I also questioned whether I want to do this anymore. And I think there's this inflection point of like, this was so easy when it was just me and I was guarding a nightclub, and I could just do my own thing. And so and for me, this was significant dollars. I lost almost $1 million at this stage in the business. And the company was bleeding money because of the mid-level bureaucracy I'd built up. And so I was just on a whiteboard in front of my YPO form at the time. And I was just drawing, what would it look like if we removed the mid-level managers? And I had this idea, what if I just decentralized everything? Because right now, if you have a mid-level security manager that hires and fires for 15 different sites, well, all those sites, what if you just had a decentralized supervisor who hired and fired for that specific site? And if he or she could do the training and provide the uniforms and was accountable to do so, and you paid them a small amount, you'd pay them a larger amount, I should say. If you didn't have that mid-level manager, would that even be possible? And of course, I went around and talked to our frontliners and said, what if you made decisions versus head office hiring someone and that person shows up to the site and the client has an issue, they call head office and you come down and get your knuckles wrapped. Like, what if the client just dealt directly with you for 90% of the things that are non-contractual, but the delivery of the service? And, the team at the time, they lit up, David. They just said, if I could actually do something outside of just do these stupid security reports, you wouldn't have to pay me anything. I would love that. I hate when you guys make decisions. So I knew I was on the right track, and the subtitle of my book, the first system that allowed that to come to life, the subtitle is The Outrageous Empowerment, the incredible story of giving employees their brains back. And it wasn't because they didn't have brains. The policies, the bureaucracy had taken it from them. In our industry, David, the old industry, before you'd make a decision, you had a manual, an SOP, standard operating procedure manual, that you would have to go and look at and say, what am I supposed to do right now? Like, talk about my brain does not get used. I check this book where I don't even know where the book is and what page this decision is on, even if the agendas or the beginning is clear. And so we came up with a decision-making process. If you're going to do something and you've not been trained and have no experience, ask yourself 3 questions once you've decided what to do, and actually use these questions to help you with your decision. Is what you're about to do the right thing for our business based on our purpose and values?
Okay.
Is it the right thing for our customer? And are you willing to be accountable? If it's yes, 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 move, don't ask anybody. So that's how I kind of brought this decentralized, because everyone said, well, how does it work? What about this? What about that? Well, I'd create a framework, a decision-making framework. And that was really why that company was so successful.
Yeah, and from what I'm hearing, it makes a lot of sense, Ron, that I think a lot of people that would hear decentralization or having no middle management, the big fear, of course, would be, well, how do I know that people are making decisions the way that I would want them to be making decisions? And so what I'm hearing is you answered that by giving them a framework of how to think about things. It's interesting. I've often said that one of the most important things we can do as leaders is teach people how to think. And I don't mean that like you. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, like similar to your comments about giving people their brains back. I don't mean to suggest when I say teach people how to think that they're idiots and they don't know how to think, but rather, is there a philosophical framework? Is there a way that we make, to use your words, or is there a way that we make decisions? How do we, as we sit to try to decide what I should do in a given situation, what's my philosophy about how I think about that? And it's interesting that we so often don't teach people those things. And we just assume either that they can't do that, or we assume that, of course, they'll do the right thing, but we haven't really taught them how to think about what the right thing is. And so if you don't give them that framework, they're going to be frustrated, and we're going to be frustrated.
Yeah. And you're right. There's this domino effect, so at the beginning of my culture masterclass, I said, we've all started companies because we were experts at something, but at some point you become the bottleneck, right? And this is true. And so if you think about these positive, negative dominoes to not having a decentralized environment, and by the way, I'm not suggesting people go and do this. It just works for me. And my experience says that it's the soul of our business. I would not lead a company that did otherwise today, or I would just check. I'm out. That's when I'll retire. So a few things. One, you create these policies and procedures, and right down to the micro policy, because you assume that nobody knows what to do. And and then you've had people drop the ball. So you want to tighten it up and make sure that no one can make mistakes. But then what happens is you've sucked the innovation out of the company, because no one can actually innovate. They play within that tight box, actually. And so then you complain that no one has any ideas and they can't solve problems. And, there is that. The other domino effect is, once that does happen, what you find out is you find these spiky pieces, individuals with expertise that you didn't know. You find out who your next leader is. Whoa, so-and-so's so good at this. Wow, look at that. You really, you really get this uplifting of all individuals that you can tap into resource-wise. Find out who your next leaders are. It's been fantastic. You learn a lot in your organization, which to me is like an organism. It should morph and flow, and there shouldn't be one system that proceeds over the whole thing.
And so I'm curious about, a lot of things that I'm curious about, but one, so this model that you've created that works for you, and I love your point that it doesn't mean it's the right or wrong thing. It's just, if you're going to run a company, it's the way you want to do it. And so other people may have different points of view. But clearly it's one that encourages a high degree of engagement, of buy-in, I'll use the word ownership on the part of team members, because you're giving them the authority to make decisions, empowering them, and the accountability for the decisions that they make. I'm curious, were you in that company and or in your current company, it seems to me consistent with the whole approach of what is often called open book management, where we're sharing financial data and a portion of the returns with our staff, because it's going to help them drive take the actions that drive the business in the right direction. Were you a proponent of that as well, or not so much so?
Yeah, look, absolutely. That to me is very important, because you want complete alignment. Like I always say today, in housing, there's a lot of friction around housing, and I see some friction points. In a traditional environment, my experience was there was friction between the field and the head office, right? Major friction.
In most industries, that's true.
That's right, because the field calls the manager and they say, I need this thing, help with this thing that goes on the bottom of my to-do list. It is not a priority, hence friction. Ron never gets back to me. We have a friction point. Without that layer gone and people able to do those things, 90% of those things on their own, because essentially that's the other thing. I'll just weave in here. I'm jumping around a little bit, David.
That's right.
But not all decisions are the same. I used to use high risk, low risk. And then after reading Invent and Wander from Jeff Bezos, I don't know if you read that book.
I'm not.
fantastic, a book of all his writings, shareholder letters, etc. He talks about this thesis of one-way door, two-way door decisions, right?
Okay.
90% of the decisions in your company, maybe higher, are two-way door decisions. What podcast, software you're going to use, a decision with a customer. These are two-way door decisions. You could make a decision, make a mistake, go back out the door, right?
So two-way means just to be clear, two-way decisions or door decisions are ones that you can reverse course if it doesn't work. Is that the definition?
Correct. That's right. And quickly-ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
One-way doors are not. I'm going to change the bank account, change my banking relationship, get rid of a partner, change the software that runs this whole company. Those are one-way door decisions. Those are typically not what frontliners do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually held at the leadership. So everything outside of that is usually a two-way door decision where people will learn. And so I believe that we should allow the frontlines to make mistakes and to make a lot of the two-way door decisions and it's important. And there's two pieces that come out of that. And actually what I was going to say first is when it comes to housing, there was friction, not just on, head office and front lines, but there was friction on tenant landlord friction, like raising the rents, and you're raising the rents on me. So I came into the space with that as a major friction. And I wanted, to your point, I wanted to get everybody to the same side of the table. My vision was, why not from owner to customer? Can we all get on the same side of the table? And that's it. That's different. And then, so, to your original comment, like how do you execute on some of the stuff too is, and know this, if you're listening to this, people will make mistakes. If they're two-way door mistakes, then don't worry about it too much. Yeah. There's two things that come out of that. You'll either say, whoa, David as a frontliner made this mistake. Pause. Let's create an education program and educate people across the organization. If this happens, be careful to make this decision because this could become the result. That happens 10% of the time, maybe less. Usually someone does something incredible and they're innovating. They're doing something very positive. That is almost as important or more. You have to stop and say, whoa, David did this thing. Stop. When this happens, we want you to behave or make this type of decision. You're going to stop, tell the story, celebrate, right? And so if you build that intentionally into the organization, it just kind of moves on its own. You get everybody the same side of the table.
Fascinating. So I'm really interested in this idea of everybody being on the same side of the table as it relates to customers and what you're doing in the housing market. So, sometimes we tend to think of the customer and the provider, I'll call them, as being on opposite sides. I want to sell you something. I want to get your money for it. And you're creating a very different relationship where we're on the same side of the table. Yeah. Talk about that. And how does that work? And what's the risks of that? And what have you learned?
Yeah, I love this question. Thanks for asking. So in my company today, the building ambassadors are customers that live in the building. Okay, so that means that they are customers that engage with us. They're working with us. And they do this for rent credit. They're not employees. Okay. They're not part-time employees. It's for a rent credit. It's an exchange. They make a commitment to the community in exchange for rent credit, and there are outcomes with those commitments. But to your point, I'm going to go back to Jeff Bezos here too. I was studying him, and I love to study some of what I believe are some of the best companies and leadership behind those companies. And he always talked about in his leadership meetings, David, he would say, keep a chair open and pretend that a customer is seated there so we can involve them in the discussion even though they're not there, right? At VIDA, we do something a little different. So we have building ambassadors. But if I go back to the security business for a minute, because there's a line that connects these two. When I removed the mid-level management, what happened is I had all these projects, the company newsletter, just things that were popping up that mid-level managers used to deal with. And what I started to do is farm them out to the security guards and say, hey, anybody want to do the company newsletter? And I have 10 people raise their hand and say, yeah, we'd love to do that. And I'll do it for free and no problem. So we had about 56 security guards doing bank reconciliation, different projects. In this business, as I was building it, I didn't have any security guards. I only had customers that lived in the buildings, and I didn't have any team members whatsoever. So I decided to farm out these types of activities to the frontliners. So today, if we have a project, maybe we have a social media project, maybe we have a part-time role, full-time role, data entry, APAR, we go to our customers first. and we give them first right of refusal to see if we have someone that could work at VIDA that lives in the buildings. And so in these communities.
Interesting.
And interesting enough, what happens then is when you do your quarterly planning, and right now we have 28% of our full-time team are customers that work full-time in the business. So I beat Jeff Bezos. Sorry, Jeff, you're listening to this. I have my customers in the chair for our strategic discussions, system building. They are there. And they'll say, Ron, with my customer hat on, because I run AP here for the company, I don't think that'll work. But here's what I think will work, because as a customer, this may not work. And so you really get everyone on the same side of the table, right? It's fantastic. And so it's been a real honor, and I've really been able to push this same side of the table thesis in this business, because I really have customers working in the business.
Do you think it's a really fascinating concept? And as I'm hearing this for the first time and thinking about it out loud, I'm wondering, do you think that that the ability to truly have the customer working, on the same side of the business, as an employee of yours while also being a customer, do you think that's unique to the housing business? Is that available in most businesses, or is that like a rare thing? What's your thinking about that?
That's a broad one. So I think you have to be thoughtful about it, right? I mean, for me, if I go back to security, that would have been very difficult to have a security manager in our business. That, like, I could invite them to a quarterly planning, give them a seat at the table. I would have integrated it, not as a full-time stakeholder, but I think the opportunity is integrate them. I don't think this is black or white.
Right.
So I go back to, I don't know, give me an example. You're a law firm, okay? So my lawyer can't hire me. But what he could do is say, we're having a strategic discussion on how to build our business. We'd like your voice in the room. Could you join us? We'd like to have you on a panel. We'd like to really engage you with our thought process around managing real estate customers. And we could really use your help here. You are co-creating that with your customers. Right. So there's still ways around it.
I guess what I'm hearing there, Ron, is it's sort of like we could do focus groups, we could do panel discussions to make sure that at least the customers, the end users of whatever our product or service is, have more of an opportunity to contribute to the thinking as we do our planning.
Yeah, and the planning is the important part. I think most people do this when they're reacting to an issue. I think it's the planning side. It's building the business, because this is, I think, an important point. I don't do the customers that work in our business, David, they aren't focused on necessarily the customer onboarding or the application process. It's the business. That's very different.
Yeah.
Right. It's the business.
Yeah.
And so we really, right. You're going a lot broader from the advice that you're, and the collaborative discussion you're having with usually we bring on a customer to solve this small problem. Do you like red or do you like brown, Ron? It's like, well, this is boring. I like red. Sure. And so I think, what do you think about color in general? Should we even be using color in our business? Is a much more fruitful discussion.
Right. Yeah, that's much bigger. So that's in your current company. So you've got all these people who are, not all of them, many people who are customers or tenants in your properties, and they're playing an active role in your business. Give me a sense of scale in terms of, so how many staff do you have that are not customers, and how many are customers?
Yeah. So we have about 15 full-time support center staff here, about 10 in the field. Out of those two groups, 28% are customers. So what is that? I don't know what of them is. That's 25.
That's
25.
That's a pretty. That sounds to me like a
big number.
Well, not only is that a big number, but what I was going to say is it sounds to me like a small number of human beings to run a company the size that you're running.
It is, because 10 of those individuals are field repair and maintenance. We call building services team members, but they're in the field. So only 15 are here at head office. Okay, we call support center. We don't use the word head office. 220 are in the field, cleaners, building ambassadors, and what we call team captains. Because interesting, this might be interesting for the listeners. And we've had to build this over time, but every building has a dedicated building ambassador. This is a customer who lives in the building that manages that building, okay? When it was a single building ambassador, that was actually challenging. There was too much noise. Well, then what we started to do to get better alignment, when I say noise, building ambassadors were calling all the time. How do I do this? How do I do that? So what we started to do is say, okay, let's do this in groupings of geographic groupings, 250 units on average, called 10 buildings, average building size being 25 units. So there's 10 building ambassadors. They're on their own collaborative team chats. They're sharing resources. They share customer satisfaction scores, repair and maintenance scores. They are scorecarded. They compete with other teams now. We've got them competing. And now, of course, we're using a lot of AI to support this and automation, which I hope we talk about today too. I love this topic. And so sorry, the original question was, because I'm going off track here, your original question was—
I'm just curious about the size of the scale of how many people are we talking about through this organization?
Yes. So there you go. So you're 25, 28, something like that. And that is field, full-time salaried folks and support center. That's finance president. We've got a president here, head of people and culture, and people running our chief investment officer, his team, and accounting, but no ops team. There's no operations here at the business. And then 220 in the field part-time folks receiving rent credits for cleaning, being building ambassadors and team captains, which kind of more of a coach at that team level.
Got it. It's what's reminding me of, I don't know if this is true in universities in Canada. I suspect it probably is. But in the U.S., in university settings, when there are dormitories, it is not unusual to have what are typically called resident advisors or RAs on a hall. I was one of those when I was in college, as was my wife. And so we were an RA, and that was a student at the time who was a resident of that building and was responsible for many of the different kinds of activities like you're describing. It's a very similar kind of model.
I think it's very similar. We started off that way, and probably where you probably reported to someone at the university level or some version of that. We're now into teams. You're 95% of your issues now with AI, 98 are sorted out collaboratively with your team and technology. Only a small sliver really even shows up here. So if I showed you our team chats, you'd see people like, hey, I've got a showing on Thursday. I can't make it. Can anyone make it? Hey, anyone have any caulking left? I've got this thing I'm trying to solve. Hey, anyone know what to do in this situation? I wouldn't even know what's going on in those team chats. And you're building the confidence and the collective knowledge of the organization.
Yes.
Otherwise, it goes ding, 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 right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point about this. If we look at this from a broader perspective, that I really like what you're saying here, that by allowing people, number one, allowing people to make these decisions on their own when they're two-door decisions, and so you're allowing them, and you're also giving them the community and the tools and resources to learn how to do it. They're developing their capabilities and their confidence. Then they're developing their skills. How do we learn our skill? How do we learn to do things? We try them and we see what works and what doesn't work, and we get better because that worked. I'll do that some more, and that didn't work. I'll stop doing that. But if you've created the opportunity for people to have those experiences, and equally importantly, the support system through the community, through AI tools, through other tools, so that they have resources to help figure that out, you've put people in a position to grow and learn, which I suspect would be obviously way more satisfying and rewarding for them. And as importantly for you as an organization, you're developing a much more capable organization because people have the skills instead of having to go to their boss to find out what to do.
That's right. And then we're competing, right? So the interesting thing about this, we compete with that's rather the wrong word. They're comparing us with their full-time experience at their full-time job, and they're not getting that experience culturally, collaboratively, building knowledge, learning new skills on the education side, trade skills, leadership skills. That's not happening. We are 10Xing, so we're pretty sticky as an environment. So it's not just sticky as someone who's driving Uber for VIDA. They don't want to move out of their place because this is also, they get a rent credit or they're paid as a community contractor. People do light repair and maintenance. And so there's this ecosystem that they really lean into and they like to participate in. So it becomes very sticky with your customer and stakeholder.
I want to take just a brief moment in our conversation now to share with you an offer that I think many of you will find really valuable. If you've been listening to the Culture Architects podcast for some time, you've heard me over and over again talk about how we've helped thousands of companies design intentional cultures. That process is what I outline in my book, Culture by Design. And right now, we're offering listeners a free download of Chapter 5. Chapter 5 focuses on one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies make all the time, relying on core values that all sound great, but don't actually tell people how to behave. Words like integrity, teamwork, excellence, and service are important, but if 10 employees define those words different ways, well, we're not going to create the kind of clarity and consistency that a great culture really requires. So in Chapter 5 of Culture by Design, I explain exactly how to move from these vague values to clear, teachable behaviors that your team can actually understand and ultimately practice. You can download it for free at culturewise.com/free chapter. Again, that's culturewise.com/free chapter. Now, let's get back to the conversation. I'm going to go back to one of the things I think that strikes me as interesting about this whole conversation, the way that you think about things, and I appreciate and admire what you're saying, is that what I hear you saying in a lot of different ways is that rather than being dogmatic about things always need to happen this way or things should never happen this way, what you're saying is, 90% of issues could be handled in a certain way, and that's fine. And there's 10% that, we're going to need to go to headquarters or whatever, or the sports center to figure out what to do. Or 80 or 90% of decisions are two-door decisions, and so we can handle them that way. And when we get to the others, we'll handle them in a different way. Because I would imagine that many people's intellectual challenge or disagreement with this approach is the one-offs. Well, what if this happened, or what if that happened? See, that system could never work because if this happened, we wouldn't know what to do. And what you're saying really in response to that is, yeah, if that happens, we have a way of dealing with it. But that's less than 10% of them. The other 90%, we can do way more effectively.
And I think you nailed it. I think back to the two-way, one-way door decisions. And I'll go back to simple language. What I used to use before reading that was very low risk or high risk, right? And so if it's low risk, get out of the way. If it's high risk, pay close attention, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost that simple. And so I feel bad, and I'm now probably, I probably get a little short with entrepreneurs that treat all decisions the same when they're walking through this, and it's probably, and I've got to remember I have to meet them where they're at. But I get a little annoyed. I'm like, this is not the same type of decision. This shouldn't even be in your brain right now.
Yes.
It shouldn't even be in your atmosphere.
Yep.
This is so small. Who cares? Like, it's no different than when my kids argue and fight. They'll say, Dad, I've got 9, 7, and 4.5 now. And they'll argue, and I'll say, are you going to remember this or care about this in 6 months? If the answer is no, drop it now.
Yeah.
Like most of these two-way door decisions, no one's going to care. And in fact, you're stealing the organization's learning. Let them fall, let them learn. And I'll tell you, it goes from understanding that, the next level of that, which is challenging because I've been through it, is when someone comes to you and they say, David, I'd like to do this thing and I have an idea. And David, that it's not going to work. Getting to the level of letting you fail, because there's two things that are true. One, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. It's a two-way door. And so let that person discover on their own.
Right.
Because if you tell them, look, I've done that before and it doesn't work, they're going to say, you think you're so smart and you'll never let me do anything, and why am I working here? There's some risk, right?
Yeah.
The second thing that is true is that maybe it will work. The times have changed.
Maybe I was wrong.
Maybe they figured out a way that it works. And so you make this clear, like, that'll never work. I've done it 3 times. I know the play. And when you hit that S curve of your own experience and you let yourself get in the way of that, I don't think you do yourself a favor. I think you should get out of the way, because it's a two-way door. Get out of the way. You never know.
Yeah. I think that's a really fascinating point. When I think about the way in which we so often create too many rules and things and, procedures for every single thing instead of letting people try things, that there's a there's something I read many years ago. I don't remember where I read this, who wrote it, but it has always stayed in my mind. And whoever the author was that said this, the way that I remember it at least, is he said that rules tell us what we can or cannot do, but principles tell us what we should or shouldn't do. And it was an interesting point because what happens in my observation is so often we create so many rules for things in order to keep people from making decisions about things. And what ends up happening, not only do they not make good decisions, but people start to think, as long as I met the rule, I did what was okay. When in fact, that may not be the right thing to do. If we teach people, what our philosophy is about this, how we think about these, what principles we use to make decisions, now they're making those decisions within that philosophical context, or they're following the principle of what's at stake, as opposed to just thinking, well, you said that the rule said X, so okay, I followed the rule. What are you complaining about now? And so this tendency to create more and more rules in order to squash people's decision making actually ends up having the opposite of impact of what we had hoped to do when we started to create all these rules.
That's right. You're frustrated that no one has a brain anymore because your company took it from them with the policies. I thought you were, it's funny, I had heard another quote one time that is a harsher quote, but true, is rules are made for children. If you want your employees to act like a bunch of children, create more rules. There is truth to this, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. In my first company, to that point, in my first company that I'd run, I used to do these lunches that I called my best places to work lunches. And my assistant would set up for me maybe 3, 4, 5 team members. And I would go out to lunch once a month with a different group of 4 or 5. And we had no specific agenda. It was just a chance for me to ask questions and get to know them better, for them to get to know me better. But I called them my best places to work lunch because one of the things I was looking for is curious about what makes any place a really great place to work. Not necessarily us, but just like if from your point of view, what is it that makes some place a really good place? And the common theme that I heard, this is my distilling of all the messages I heard from people, the most common theme I heard was, we want to be treated like adults. And we appreciate, and that's a sad comment because it suggests that in most places they aren't. But what they wanted more than anything is, just trust me, treat me like an adult. And like simple things like, I used to say, if you're sick, stay home. And if you're healthy, come to work and you make the decision. I don't want to see any notes. I trust you. You're an adult. Right. Make your own decisions. And like simple, really simple things like this, just being treated like an adult was what they wanted more than anything else. They weren't talking about a 401k plan or benefits. They were talking about being treated like adults. And I think it really goes to the heart of what you're saying.
Absolutely. And look, we built it. I didn't have an office before the pandemic. I have 10 years I haven't had an office before I sold my security company. We don't track vacation. It's unlimited vacation. It's results driven. I mean, once you get into this in the culture, you can really bring it to life. Yeah. David, I'm curious. I have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because I'd love to hear kind of what's new with you too. Yeah. And one of my questions I have, which I had probably a year ago-ish, I had a bit of an aha moment on our culture here. And I think I saw a post online or something. It said like, you want to build $1 million business, you have an idea. You want to go to 10 million, you need to build systems and processes around that idea. You want to get to 100, you need leadership, and you want to go to 1 billion, you need a brand. That's probably accurate-ish, right? And so we are on that path to 100 million, and I thought, okay, what hit me, whether all these facts are true or not, at least, right? What hit me, David, was we have strong values, really strong values. And we every 6 months, we go back to the drawing board. We'll upgrade our values based on if there's new behavior that we need to, have shine more into the behaviors in our values. Great. If there's behaviors that someone's joined and it was detrimental and we missed it, then we'll upgrade. Those are kind of the upgrade levers. But what hit me was, and I don't know if you ever read Nine Lies About Work, Marcus Buckingham. You ever read that book?
I've read I've read most of his books. I don't think I've read that one.
Yeah, I actually had, I forget the guy who wrote it with him. I had him on my podcast too. I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, 9 Lies What Works says leadership's not a thing. It says that leadership comes down to the individual. First, I'm like, that's BS. But then I was like, yeah, you know what? Barack Obama and Trump are very different leaders. People follow them. So I since then, I agreed, okay, anyone can lead if you have followers. If you have spikiness in something, people will follow. So all that to be said, it was clear to me that we did not have what leadership meant here at VIDA. And I think that's a very important thing. It was not described. What does leadership, which is different than our values. Now, I don't know if other people were weaving leadership principles in. I had not really.
Mm-hmm.
And so we built out a path of leadership, and our principles are 7 principles of leadership. I'm curious, how does, from your perspective, leadership and values, how do they coincide? What's that look like? And has that evolved for you over time?
So I would say, Ron, for me, a cornerstone of everything that I've learned and teach people is that, and this may sound blasphemous to some, but those who know my material know how I think about this. I'm going to say it this way. This is overly simplified, but I think values are overrated. And at the end of the day, what I care most about are the behaviors that people do, because that's where it shows up every day. And it's not that the values aren't important, but the values typically are so broad and abstract. And yes, they may describe the things that we believe in or that we hold sacred, that are important to us. But other than saying that this is what we believe in, okay, so how does that show up every day? Unless I can describe the behaviors for how we think about things and how we act every day, it's pretty hard for me to operationalize that in any really meaningful or substantive kind of way. So I am very behaviorally oriented.
Yes.
As we think about those behaviors, most of the behaviors that, and I call them fundamentals, that we create for myself and for organizations are ones that apply to everybody in the organization. Sometimes I hear behaviors that also could be, I would say they might be leadership behaviors that could be sometimes distinct. For example, some leadership behavior there might be a leadership behavior around empowerment and how we allow people to make their own decisions. That would be an important leadership principle, but most of the employees, if they don't have an ability to empower somebody else, well then, okay, that's nice, but that doesn't really affect me. So there might be a few things that could be considered leadership principles that might be separate from others. But at the end of the day, what I care more about is, how do we do things around here? Now, when we talk about those behaviors for our listeners, I want to make an important distinction. There's a distinction in my mind in terms of the level of behavior. On one level of behaviors are the things that sometimes people call SOPs, standard operating procedures. Those are the rules that kind of can sometimes are important, sometimes get in the way. I mean, in some organizations, you're a regulated industry, you better follow certain procedures. It's not optional. We got to do it a certain way. But that's not our culture. Those are just operating procedures. My own language, and I just made up this language, but my own language for the behaviors that I'm talking about that drive our culture is, I call them principle-based behaviors.
Yes, that's right.
So they're a higher level behavior, but they're in action. So examples of principle-based behaviors are things like one that we call practice blameless problem solving.
I remember
it's a really important behavior. Or get clear on expectations. Do what's best for the customer. These are actions, not values. They're actions, but they're a higher level action. They're a principle, but they're an action form. And so to me, if we can define those behaviors that are how we want people to operate, the philosophy, the way we want them, it still gives them plenty of room inside of that to make their own decisions on the spot, in how to handle a situation. But we framed how to think about that because we have this principle-based behavior that represents how we do things around here. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah. I think that, so what I'm hearing you say is that leadership's kind of weaved in there.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
It is. But always focused on behaviors.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, because I think of some of our our leadership principles of critical thinking, which could be both, vision, self-awareness, which could be both, but I would put more stock into the leadership side. I'd be harsher on someone on some of these things. It's interesting.
Yes,
Okay,
and what I would say about that, Ron, from my experience, is like I would, and this is just the way I think about things, but I would even convert those leadership principles into actions. So
yes,
instead of saying self-awareness, I'd rather say, learn to understand how you impact other people around you. Okay, that's self-awareness, but it's an action.
Okay.
So
well,
translating everything to action. Go for it.
So I'll read off one of our latest kind of values, and you tell me if it passes the David test. So team driven. Okay. Together we build, individually we drive. So there's a framing quote, but then as I read through, we're one VIDA. We work together to solve complex problems, always considering those closest to the change and ensuring the right people are part of the solution. And the next is we go direct. We handle challenges by going straight to the source with kindness, honesty, and respect to resolve issues quickly. We lean into healthy conflict and strengthen our team as a result. And then it goes on.
Yeah,
Am I kind of hitting the marks?
Yes, you are. Yes, so those are behaviors. If I were to give you some advice,
please.
So this is a really simple thing that people miss on, and I would avoid the we statements. And I would avoid them for two reasons. One is they weaken the statements. So if I hear we go direct, I'm glad we do that. I don't have to do anything. If you say go direct, talk to people, boom, there's more strength to it without the we statement. There's another more subtle reason actually to avoid the we statements and to just say, do these things. And that is that when you write them all as we statements, you open yourself up more to the debate of people who push back and say, well, I see a lot of times when we don't do that. And so clearly this isn't an accurate description of who we are, because just yesterday I saw Ron didn't do that. If we don't write them as we statements and we just say, do these things, what we're saying is we want to be the most amazing company you've ever seen. In order for us to get there, these are the kinds of things we're going to have to do. We're not always there right now. Sometimes we do them well and sometimes we don't. And when we fall short, we're going to coach and support and help each other to do this more consistently, as opposed to claiming this is who we are and how we always do things.
So I love this. And I think this is good for our listeners, because I do think that most companies are way too slow to upgrade their values. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So in real time, I've just made a note, we're dropping we statements. When I get off here, they'll be dropped from our values.
Great.
I agree with that. And so entrepreneurs listening to this, when you get great advice from someone like David and it makes sense and it checks the boxes, don't sit on your high knees and wait for somebody to do something, move, And so that's great. Well, thank you. We're going to, that makes perfect sense.
So we have just a few minutes left. And this is, you and I could probably talk about this stuff for the next 3 hours. But I really appreciate the way you are, one, open to and curious about seeing things in new and different ways. And recognizing, as we said earlier, that's just the way you want to run your company. It doesn't mean other people can't do it in a different way, but if you're going to run a company, it's going to be this way, and you found it to be really successful. I also appreciate, again, as we've talked about, this recognition that not all decisions are the same, and they shouldn't all be treated the same. And we can put them in low risk, high risk, one-way door, two-way door language that helps us to think about how to approach different things in different ways. As you think about where you are in your own leadership journey right now, what's the biggest challenge you're still trying to noodle through, that you're trying to figure out, there's got to be a way we could do this better? Where's the biggest challenge you're working on right now?
Well, first I'll think like I'm looking in the mirror here, because funny, I just went through our path of leadership. We've got 7 leadership principles, and our team fills it out. I fill it out from self-awareness. You find out where your gaps are. And the biggest thing that, and it's funny, I'm probably one of the leaders where my biggest strengths are my biggest weaknesses.
Okay.
My biggest strength is vision. I can get anything moving. I can lift mountains and get people moving. My biggest weakness is I get things moving and I run really fast and I get things moving, and sometimes I should slow down. So the number one thing that came out of this just last week was, high points on the vision and driving vision back to decisions. No problems there. The challenge, what people challenged me on, which was great, I really appreciated it, was how do I, or the encouragement was to slow down and use data points before I run through my decisions, right?
Okay.
And so that was great, and I think that was fair, very fair, and very helpful to me to say, okay, you know what? Sometimes I should, especially with AI access, I should. There's no excuse to not try to gain some data points. Although I will say there's an education component to some decisions. They're not necessarily going to be data points. It's not going to affect the bottom line. I'm looking at patterns and thinking about different things. So there's this education that I'm obviously not doing well enough on. Hey, I'm making a decision. Here's what I have for facts, and here's what I don't have for facts. Based on all this and your feedback, I'm going to move. And so, but there are going to be places where I should slow down a little bit and use some data to reinforce my decision. Because and Francis Frey says this. To build leadership, you need authenticity, you need empathy, and you need logic, right? And so that logic piece I could bring up a notch for sure. And so I'm excited to work on that. And part of that as a leader is I'll debrief this with my leadership team next month and say, I need your help. I need your help. You need to stop me and say, Ron, whoa, did you look at any of the numbers on here? What numbers support this? Let's talk. This leadership is not a one-way top down. I believe it's got to be very collaborative. If I'm going to upgrade my leadership skills and my communication skills, I need my team to help me do that. And I need to ask them to do that, right? And so we really believe in this flywheel of leadership. And then if it's okay, before we run, I'd love to talk about AI and how we're integrating AI. This is hot and I love it as a topic. Can we jump there? Yeah?
Sure. We just have a moment or two, but go ahead.
Yeah, look, I would just say this. I am implementing AI. I would say I'm very proud of this, Dave. We're probably 1% of 1%. Deloitte's told me this. Other groups have told me as far as how we're integrating AI within the organization. I think some groups are waiting for their SaaS to implement AI. Some are using consultants or hiring in-house folks and bottlenecking it to one place. I've gone grassroots. I want everyone I'm encouraging everyone to have their own projects where they're using automation AI. And so for 2.5 hours every 2 weeks, we're here almost like implementing a new software. Everyone's got their list on their board. We get to find out who's spiky with what skills, and we're implementing AI and knocking off the things that drain people's energy and the things that that should be automated. On the other hand, I'm spending equal amounts of time on EQ, communication skills, relationship building. I'm balancing these two things off. So I'm doubling down on both sides, and I love it. I'm curious, what are your thoughts, and what are you encouraging folks to do in the world of AI?
Yes. So quick thought on that. So one of my favorite authors, thinkers, writers, speakers is Daniel Pink.
I love Daniel Pink.
And
Daniel, we love you.
I was watching Daniel Pink. He's awesome. And I'd seen recently a graduation speech he did. In graduation season, there's all these speeches on YouTube and stuff. And I'd seen one that he had done for, I think it was the Columbus, Ohio School of Art and Design. And he was talking about AI. And I thought he made a really interesting and important point. And he was talking about that in a world where data is no longer a differentiator because it's all available on AI. So being really smart about something isn't particularly useful anymore because I can just get that on AI. So you're not going to win because you have more knowledge than somebody else. But what he said is that what AI can't do is have taste and discernment. And so what is good and what is bad and what is helpful and what is not helpful, and being able to think about how to use this information that is now so readily available and have discernment about it is the real skill set that will be most valuable and most needed in the future. I mean, it's always been needed, but it's going to be even more needed because the attribute of having more knowledge than the next guy is not valuable anymore. I mean, think about, I'm using the extreme examples, doctors, lawyers, other professionals who take a lawyer. You know more information than everybody else, and that's your advice is valuable. But that information anybody can get in an instant for free.
That's right.
Now.
That's right.
And so it's the judgment and the discernment, which go back to EQ type teachings, helping people to understand relationships, how to use information that becomes available in a more discerning way becomes the skill set that's most valuable. And that was his point to these students who are graduating. And I think it makes a lot of sense. This is an unbelievable tool to be used thoughtfully. And the more skillful we are in that discernment, the better off we're going to be.
I agree. And I think it is, and again, to hammer home the point, also that relationship, how do you communicate with other human beings, right? That is critically important, right?
It is unbelievable. And AI doesn't do that for you.
It doesn't do that. I'll do more content here tomorrow and spending as much time in intentional relationship building, skill building, communication skills as AI implementation. And for leaders listening, I think it's an important part of your business. Don't lose track of that. I think it's very important.
Enormous part of it. Enormous. Well, Ron, this has been fun to reconnect with you. And again, you and I could talk for hours about this. If people want to learn more about your books, the work that you're doing, VIDA, where would they find more? We'll put it in the show notes too, but a quick plug for where do people learn more about you?
So ronlovett.ca, there's information. So the book's Outrageous Empowerment, Scaling Culture on there, some podcasts. I've got a new book called VIDA, which has just been released. And there's an audio. I finally did an audio book, and I've got the comedian Sean Majumder. He just moved from LA to Canada. He's in that book with me. So we have a lot of fun. I've kind of mixed up the audio a little bit and pulled some of our customers into the audio too. So that's a fantastic book. And it's on for 99 cents because our customers download it. We give them free books as part of their onboarding. And so that's it. And then follow me on LinkedIn if you're interested. I try to be helpful and thoughtful.
Great. Well, thanks again so much for being with us, Ron, and being part of Culture Architects podcast and community.
Happy to be.
And that wraps up today's episode of Culture Architects. If you're enjoying these conversations, subscribe on your favorite platform and also consider leaving a quick review, and that way other culture-minded leaders can find the show. And for more tools on building a high-performing culture in your organization, visit CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.